Okay, so I need to do it a little bit bigger. I can do it bigger.
Bigger.
Yeah, no, a little bit more energy.
Like a bear.
Oh, finally got through the Mega Man battle. Welcome to Total Pebble Knockdown, everybody. I am Nathan, I believe. Who are you?
And I believe I'm still Alex.
Okay, good. Well, then that hasn't changed. And welcome to the show. We have quite a bit to get into, so I think let's just jump on into it. I stole that from somebody, I think.
Jump cut straight into the content.
Just jump right into it. I think I stole that from Philip DeFranco. I literally think I stole that one from Philip DeFranco. But anyway. Alright, so our first topic of conversation today comes from Discord. In a Discord discussion.
Dum, dum, dum.
That's like a branding thing.
Catchphrase.
It is. It's a wonderful catchphrase.
That's not a catchphrase, but it's fine.
It's it's a title. It's TM, registered trademark, copyright. We have that going on for us. So we had, before we even started the show, actually, we had asked for episode suggestions over in our Discord channel. And one of the things that came up was about essentially inspiration points. I thought what I would do is actually tell you what that was, and then we'll just get into a little bit of a discussion on it. This came from a friend of the show and supporter of the show, Patreon of the show, actually, Seagoat777. Seagoat writes, from a discussion in another server, I've been thinking about in-game mechanics resources. I'll call it that for now. It's fine. Such as inspiration in D&D 5e, fortune points in WFRP2E and 4e, and destiny points in FFGSW. Resources that your character has at the start of a session, or can gain through a session, which can be spent to influence the outcome of certain mechanics within the system. I believe, Seagoat believes, GMs should be encouraged to reward players such resources, and also they should also encourage players to use such resources. If the GMs don't reward them or refresh them every session, then players will hoard them and not use them. Very good point, Seagoat. Okay, so I guess the first thing we should explain is just kind of like what he's talking about for the uninitiated.
Sure.
I'm not as familiar with, like, fortune points, but I know what, like, destiny and inspiration are. Okay, so inspiration points in D&D. We'll just go with that because it's probably the most famous one. If your character does something particularly interesting to the person running the game, your DM. Inspiring to the DM. They are able to give you a point of inspiration. What that does functionally is allow you to expend it so that you can re-roll something that didn't go your way. That then kind of becomes up to the player when they want to use it, but getting the inspiration point is completely dependent on your DM giving it to you. You don't just accrue it. Yeah.
A different version of that also isn't just necessarily re-rolling the dice if you fail. It could also be adding a dice roll. Say you roll a dice, but then you get to add an extra, like a d6 to it.
Okay.
That's also a variant I've seen, I think, in some places.
Okay.
I don't think the Warhammer Fantasy RP, WFRP, I don't think that would use quite the same. I'm not sure what that one uses offhand. But those systems are, last I remembered, are D10 or D1000 based systems.
That's a lot of Ds.
Yeah, a lot of Ds. Phrasing. So I don't believe those ones would be re-rolling necessarily like a D20 because it uses the D10 and D1000. But yeah, that's a different variant is the D20 plus like D6.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, no, I was always familiar with it being used as a system where you could roll if you failed and you really thought that it was important. But I would also really like to be able to add it to things like damage rolls. Like, if you told me that I could, like, re-roll a damage roll, or if I could add another die to a damage roll, if I, like, usually roll a d6, if I could roll 2. But I don't think they have specific rules in there about that, if I remember correctly.
Usually you can kind of add it to whatever you want to.
I suppose that would also be up a little bit to the players and to the DM, as with most mechanics, especially in TTRPGs. So I can tell you my experience really with inspiration back when I was playing Rembrandt. I actually did get a point of inspiration. I can even tell you what it was for. I was at a dinner party. Not me personally, but my character was at a dinner party.
Oh, okay.
And there was this scientist that was there that was very fascinated with my character because obviously I am a giant turtle that glows. They might be kind of interested in me from at least a specimen standpoint. And there was a little bit of an onus on me to say something very, very clever. And
yes.
Yeah, exactly. And they had given me, like, this pasta. And I was trying to... and I had this, like, love of bread. Originally, they gave me soup, and it gave me bad flashbacks because I thought about turtle soup, and I didn't want to eat that. So I ended up with this pasta. And so I'm really intensely thinking, like, oh, they really want me to say something smart because I'm so fascinating now. So I just kind of go, yeah, so, did you ever think that, like, pasta is what happens if bread and soup had a baby? And for some reason, Dom really loved that. So I got an inspiration point for that. Because after I said that, the rest of the crew was kind of like, huh, yeah, actually it kind of is, like, if soup and bread had a baby. Anyway, I got an inspiration point for that.
Yeah, that deserves inspiration.
And but here's the thing. Much to Seagoat's point, because a lot of us didn't really get inspiration throughout the course of the game, and they weren't doled out very often, I actually never used it the entire time.
You're too inspired.
Even though there was a point where realistically I probably should have tried to use it because I ended up trapped in a hell dimension.
Yeah, you probably should have used that.
There might have been something I should have done at that point to avoid getting lost in a Technicolor hell dimension, but I did not use it at all. And then the game essentially ended, and I never ended up using it, when it could have been a really useful resource that entire time. So, what do you think about GMs, DMs, and how they are able to reward players with those points? What frequency would you suggest they reward it to? And do you think that players should be encouraged to utilize mechanics like that?
Right. So I think if you wanted to make it a system that is not just like, hey, I'm going to give this out every once in a great while, and then players don't use them like that, I think if you want to fix that, you should have the GM give out an inspiration point at the end of a session to a player for something outstanding or over the top or just great that they thought they did for the next session. I think that would be an easy fix. It's like, hey, that comment you made about soup and bread having a baby was really great. I loved it. It made me laugh so hard, or whatever reason, you know. Next session, you have an inspiration point to use at any time you want during that session. But the caveat there would be, if you're gonna do that, make it so you have to use that in that session, or else it disappears.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So instead of saying that the GM can give you a point of inspiration whenever they feel like it, it becomes, and then you can keep it and hold on to it and accrue like multiple inspiration points if you really, I think you can do that. But I don't think your GM would give out an inspiration point to you again if you hadn't used the first one.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think the way to just overhaul that entirely would be just DM gives at least one player a point of inspiration or fate or whatever point system you're using
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the session, and you use it during your next session, and then they give somebody else, hopefully, not just the same person over and over again, because that's just, all right, you're hogging the spotlight there, Nathan.
Right.
But then it would be, all right, well, now I have to use this. It's the same issue you have with consumables in video games, like health potions.
Yeah.
Where it's, you hoard them in a lot of cases because, well, what if I need this later?
Right. The thing about, though, the health potions, though, if we're looking at the analogy there, is that those are ones that the player themselves usually controls. Like, you know what I mean? Unless
but the game gives them to you.
The game does give it to you, but like
they generally give them to you right before a big boss fight.
Sometimes they will, or you can buy them. Sometimes you can buy them. As far as I'm familiar with, like, they don't usually buy inspiration points, although that would be kind of amazing. I kind of love the idea that, like, with enough gold, you could go to an inspiration vendor and buy inspiration points.
I mean, if you need a way to sink money, you could do it.
Yeah, you probably could. Now, if you were looking at, like, a Dark Souls, though, that has the Estus Flask, so you have to, like, rest, and then it refills your Estus Flask, so you have that many. Yeah, I was thinking about that, too. Do you think that there should be, like, a, like maybe a quota or something, like where the GM says, okay, I know that I'm gonna give out like 1 or 2 inspiration points like a session to some of the players?
I don't think there should be a quota necessarily, like if you're 1 or 2, but like I think if you're gonna use it, it should be you have to give at least 1, which I guess, yeah, that's a quota, but like you have to give at least
minimum
1 to a player, minimum of 1,
yeah,
and like a maximum of not the entire party.
Sure.
Unless they all did something fucking amazing.
Sure.
Session. The other side of that as well is there, I believe, are games where you can give inspiration points to another player for something that you think they did that was really good. And I don't think it's necessarily like bardic inspiration. It's not that.
Okay.
It's, hey, you did something really cool. So like maybe each player starts, they have 1 token they can give to a player to use for whatever they want, kind of deal. But they can't use it themselves.
Okay.
But then you would have to balance it out with, well, can players give all their tokens to 1 player and let that 1 player use all those tokens at the same time to get 6 extra dice? Is that a thing you'd want them to be able to do? Or would that be like, all right, no, you can't do that. You can only use 1 at a time.
Right. Now, see, on the D&D character sheet, when you're looking at that, there's really only a box, and you either have the inspiration or you don't. So there's really only the 1 inspiration point that you can have. There aren't, like, the ability to hoard multiples of it. And as far as I'm familiar with, I believe that's how it was supposed to work mechanically. You weren't supposed to be able to hoard more than 1 at a time.
Yeah, but people house rule everything.
Right. True. But now, what you were talking about before, though, that's a very interesting concept, that you can lose it if you don't use it. Lose it or use it. Yeah.
Use it or you lose it.
Use it or
no,
use
I think that would be a fun way to deal with that, is because then it's, all right, I have this point of inspiration for this session.
Sure.
I should use this either during something important. Either you can use it when you fail a roll, maybe, or you can use it to, like, all right, I really need to succeed and I want to make sure, like, if you could use it to either re-roll a fail or gain advantage, for instance, I think that'd be cool.
Sure.
Or maybe you can use it to restore hit points if you need to.
Oh, yeah.
Give it a myriad of uses aside from just re-rolling a dice. And then say, you have this for the session, and you use it or you get it taken away at the end of the session.
Right. There is an idea there, too, that it could be specific to your class as well. Like if
Sure.
you're a cleric, maybe that means that you can restore another, whatever hit points that you usually have for like a heal spell or something like that. If you're a monk, like I usually play, maybe it would be that I can restore some of my key points without having to do a rest.
You could do something like that, although I think mechanically in game there are other ways to get around that, like the short rest and the rest.
Right.
And then it also say if you are a cleric and you can use this to heal someone for whatever points of damage, then it becomes, well, what if I didn't play a healing cleric? What if I'm a battle cleric who doesn't take any healing spells, for instance? Then it wouldn't make as much sense thematically.
Sure.
So you'd need to pay attention to that.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that if you're a GM and you have systems like that are in place, you want to be able to utilize them. And if you're going to dole them out in a very, very sparse fashion, I kind of feel like there's no real reason to use them at all because people aren't going to engage with it.
Right.
So trying to figure out a way that you can actually mitigate that. And I think that's really where you have to have some kind of consistency as to how many times you're willing to do that. It might not even be in a singular session, but you could say, like, over the course of X number of sessions, I need to give out at least this number, because sometimes things just aren't interesting. And so I could say that over, like, 5 sessions or something, I need to have, like, 5 inspiration points doled out at least. And
yeah, I think that would make it more interesting and fun for the players as well, because mechanics are great to do everything. There are the rules and the systems that make the game function. But if a mechanic isn't fun to use and people don't engage with it, then it shouldn't be there.
Right. I would also say, kind of expanding on the idea that you were talking about there, is maybe instead of using it in the very next session, maybe it could be on, like, one of those quest lines, or something to that effect, that you just need to use it before the end of this particular dungeon that you're in, or something to that effect, just because sometimes you get into those sessions where it's like, I don't really need to use anything for anything in this particular moment.
I think in those cases, too, you could be like, all right, nothing really, like, especially if it's just kind of a thematic in-between transitional session, for instance. It's like, you could, as a GM, go, hey, you have this point of inspiration for the next session, but there might not be a lot of things that are going on that are super important that require you to maybe want to use it. If you want to hold that over to the next session, if you don't use it, you could, like, if you could extend it another session, I think that would be okay. But I don't think, like, the whole quest line, because let's face it, some people are on one quest for literal years.
Yeah.
Because sometimes games are just, they go at a glacial pace, or because they couldn't play as often, or whatever, XYZ reason. It's like, you might be doing this one quest over the course of 3 or 4 years to play in a game.
True. But what about if it was, like, the dungeon or the town? Like, if you accrue it in that area.
Super dungeons are a thing, or mega dungeons are a thing. You could be in that dungeon for years.
I don't want that kind of campaign, though.
No.
I don't want to play a mega dungeon then. That feels like people who really engage with the combat specifically of an RPG and not all the other facets of it.
Yeah, and see, the issue with that is that then it becomes our other topic we're going to be talking about in a minute is, how long have you been in this dungeon?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, we've gone down 6 rooms over the course of 7 days. It's like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, we're going to dive into that in just a moment. But I do want to thank Seago for bringing this up, because it is one of those things that I've only seen in passing. I did not really utilize it at all. The other thing that I would mention too, I mean, he had said inspiration. Fortune points I'm not as familiar with.
I did look that up really quick. Fortune points is the equivalent of inspiration, where you can reroll a failed skill check or whatever else.
Sure.
Basically.
Sure. And then destiny points, I figured that those are probably very similar for the
I think
Star
it's all
Wars.
just kind of just variations of the same
Sure.
rule set.
Okay.
It's fine.
Now, what I will say on that topic, though, because this is kind of in the same realm, is that there is another system Seago did not mention, but that one that I'm familiar with, which is the 1879 system, which is actually based off of Earth Dawn. And in that, they have karma points. Now, karma points are something that can actually refresh. You usually have to use like some of your action adventure points as you've gone through to actually replenish them. You have to rest to get more of them. We actually did it day to day. Karma points are literally you can roll an additional die to the dice pool that you that you have.
Okay.
In that system, you have basically a what is it? You have a rank. If you want to use any of your skills, you have a rank in the skill and a rank with the coordinated stat that you have. That all comes together, so you end up with a rank that's like 7, 8, whatever. That has a certain number of dice that you're supposed to throw.
Oh, that's a roll and keep system.
It's a roll and keep system.
Okay, so you're rolling 7 dice, but you're only keeping like 3 of them.
Oh no, sorry, it is not that. It is.
Oh,
it is.
Never mind.
It is literally like if you are like a level, I can't remember exactly what it is, but if you have gotten to like rank 6 or 7, it will say you roll 2d6 for this, and to find out what your number is. If you get a maximum on whatever the dice are, that explodes, and you keep rolling because it's essentially a crit. So you roll it again. So you figure that then you might get like an 11 or something. Depending on what species you're playing as, there is also a die that would be the karma die. For humans, because they have no other special stats, they get a d8 for their karma. You can expend a point of karma and add that to not every roll, but a lot of the big ones that you want to do. And so
that's interesting.
So then you would basically be throwing a 2d6s for that same thing, and a d8. And that can explode as well. So
of course.
So
if you're gonna have exploding dice, you have it.
Use it for everything. And so you can massively increase the number that you end up getting for whatever the challenge rating is that you're going for, the number that you have to hit, based on using that karma. That is, though, a pool. That's not like an individual stat, and you do have to replenish it at certain times. It's not necessarily in the hands of the person running the game, though.
Okay.
That's in many ways in the hands of the players themselves to maintain and utilize when it is appropriate. There are some stats, like they're used for professional and core stats, but they're not necessarily used for every stat or role. But those are all actually laid out in the rules themselves. So you can kind of think of them as inspiration, but inspiration integrated directly into the system itself, to be utilized by the players as a resource, much more as a resource than as a special thing that you utilize on just an occasional basis. So they have used those in some systems that I'm familiar with, but so there you go. If you didn't know, now you know. Rainbow.
Rainbow swoosh. Knowledge power.
Knowledge power. There you go. Anything else that you want to discuss on inspiration?
No, I think we covered most of that pretty good.
I certainly hope so. If we did not...
If we did not, we were not inspired enough.
We need to roll points of inspiration for some sad tier, yeah. But if we did not, and if you had anything to add, you can always send us a voice clip over on Anchor, and if you would like, you can also join the discussion over on our Discord server, because this is a topic that we got right from that Discord server, and we do look there occasionally to talk about topics that people are discussing over there.
Look at that, double plug.
We got a double plug. Oh, double inspiration. It's so beautiful. Our next subject is going under the category of critical thinking, or, to shorten that, crit think. How's that working for you?
We could do crit IQ.
Crit
No,
IQ?
think is
No,
fine.
let's just crit think. It's short, it's to the point. The idea of this particular segment is to ask a question and then to do a little bit of brainstorming about it. So, on this particular crit think, I'm getting used to that one. We're going to be talking about dungeon crawls and the passage of time. Alex, I believe that the way you put the question to me was, how long were we in that cave for?
I mean, it doesn't have to be a cave to be a dungeon.
No.
Just a friendly note there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that came from the fact that a lot of times, not necessarily in the newer editions, but older editions of like 3.5, let's for instance, spellcasters to get their spells back, kinda have to take a long rest.
Sure.
So they're kind of useless if they expend all their spells in the first room of a dungeon. So it's like a lot of combats would go ahead with in combat heavy games, mind you. Kind of what would happen is, and this could have just been my experience with it from my groups I've been in, but I feel like just depending on your play style and your groups and whatever, this would be a thing. But it boiled down to, I'm out of spells. All right, well, are you useful other ways? Not really. All right, well, I guess we're gonna hunker down here in this dungeon room,
Right.
3 stories underground, and just camp for 8 hours. It's like combat in D&D specifically is 6 seconds per round.
Sure.
So let's say you'd had a 10-round combat. That's a minute of combat, expending all your spells, especially at low levels. You know, that's really easy to do. I know 5th edition made it a little bit harder to do that because you can get them back spells and stuff on short rests more often. And you also have the 0 level spells, which I believe are infinite cast. You can just cast them as many times as you want.
Cantrips.
Cantrips, yes. So there are also some attack spells that are cantrips that are decent. For instance, Eldritch Blast for Warlocks is actually I believe, cantrip that is super OP. I love it. But the point is, in a lot of the older systems, it'd be, you're out of spells, now you need to go to sleep for 48 hours spending on your rest, your race.
Right. So just to kind of clarify, so you're thinking about the idea of how long we're in dungeons and figuring that out, mostly based on what the characters are able to do, in terms what their abilities are, essentially.
Yeah. So say you take a 10-round combat, a 1-minute combat, you waste all your spells, and you're like, all right, well, now we need to rest. We're injured. That was brutal. All right, now we need to heal and rest, and you've been in the dungeon for 30 minutes.
Yes.
All right. Oh, yeah, we'll rest down here.
Mm-hmm.
Why? So it's like, all right, 30 minutes of exploring a dungeon, 1 combat down. Now you need to rest for 8 hours.
Yeah.
So the pace of going at that is a crawl. It's a literal dungeon crawl.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, if you've only gone an hour's into the dungeon, for instance, first of all, an hour deep into a dungeon should be a fairly long distance unless it's a mega dungeon, like we mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can go an hour into a cave, and you've gone a very long way.
Right.
Unless it's very narrow and it's very slow going, as per the crawl. But if you're only like 3 or 4 stories down, just leave the dungeon and go ahead and end for a night.
Yeah.
And then hit it again tomorrow.
Right. Because you're kind of exposed when you're actually in the dungeon, assuming
you're incredibly exposed.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking about this now. So you assume that you're doing like a 1 hour of actual combat, which would be a long combat, true. Then you rest in for 8 hours. You figure that you're going to have to be in several of those while you're in the dungeon. By the time you leave that dungeon, you've been down there for, what, maybe close to a week.
Yeah, you spend days down there. I
Yeah.
know someone posted on Twitter a few days ago, I think. Something to do with make sure you have rations and water and stuff because you're going to be
Was just
down in that
thinking.
dungeon for a long time or something like that. I was like, well, here's the thing. It's like you shouldn't be in a dungeon for a week. That doesn't make sense. Who the hell is building dungeons that take a week to traverse? Aside from dwarves building undercities in the mountains.
Mm. That seems like a whole question in itself. Who's building dungeons in the first place?
That's another thing I've always often, not always, always
Okay.
often.
Yes.
Another thing I've often thought about is, have you ever seen the layout of dungeons? Like traditional D&D dungeons?
Who was constructing these?
Who is building these long, winding dungeon corridors that are like one hallway with nothing on the sides that goes down for a quarter mile, and then has like a room, and then kind of like goes around? It's like, these are cave systems. These are
yeah.
not dungeons. Who would build like this? Nobody.
Nobody. No, you would fire that engineer so
They would be
quickly.
dead faster than the termites got to them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I'm used to seeing some where it is caves and tunnel systems. Like I battled, there was an Ankeg queen, so there's these Ankegs. For those of you who don't know, think of like large bugs, essentially, is what they are.
For those of you who are watching the video portion, this Nathan has put a handy dandy picture right here.
I'll find a way to put a picture in there so you can see what
It'll
an
be
Ankeg
there.
looks like. It will be there. Don't worry. Sure, I'll remember. If I forget, I'm sure people will tell me. The point is, so basically, now it's a tunnel system. But even at that point, I started asking myself, like, how did they lay this out? Like, I started, like, I kind of understand the way it was laid out in that, there's little, like, cul-de-sacs that are out in the, so for, like, nurseries and stuff like that.
I mean, if you've got a burrowing creature, then it might look like an ant farm.
Sure.
Which has got the tunnel systems, and then again the cul-de-sacs where there would be like larvae or eggs or food supplies, and then it circle around and it's just a maze essentially.
Sure, yeah. But yeah, if you get into an actual dungeon or a sewers system or something like that, you don't expect there just to be passages to nowhere or just like
No.
random place. And also, while we're at it, why are they putting down all of the traps?
Well, here's the thing. It's do they have a back way around this to get around the traps? Or do
Right.
they have to go through their own traps?
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't it be funny if you just were down in a dungeon and half the time you came across traps that obviously somebody had accidentally tripped and there were just dead people along the way of all of the traps that they accidentally set off?
That would be like going into a goblin hive and they set all these traps and forgot that the traps are there.
Yeah, exactly.
Where'd all these dead goblins come from? Well, they set all these traps and then they set all them off with their own bodies.
That's right. And so now we have no goblins left to fight. That would be interesting too. That kind of solves your problem of time. You don't have to get into any combat because your enemy was too stupid not to kill themselves off with their own traps. That's one way to solve it. So, when we're thinking about the passage of time, and it comes to dungeons, because I can see that you're under, from a completely logical standpoint, I can see where the idea, the very concept of time is going to start getting lost on you when you're down in a dungeon. There's no light, you can't see anything, so your circadian rhythm is completely off anyway. But in terms of like how long you're down there and keeping track of that, how might we actually do that? Like to make it so that players and their characters specifically can keep track of how long they are down there. Some of these people want their quests done in a timely fashion.
Alright, so first of all, there are some spells that some classes can use that can help them figure that out. I know druids specifically has a orison, a cantrip, that can kind of be like it'll tell you the weather.
Okay.
Like it's not useful in pretty much any other way, but it can tell you the weather and basically the time of day.
Got
So you
it.
cast that. It's a 0 spell. You can cast it wherever you want, but it'll be like, yeah, it's partially cloudy. It like has the way I imagine it is it comes up with like an orb of sunlight with clouds over it in your hand or whatever like that. It shows you the depiction of the weather where you are.
Got it.
And so that, for instance, is super useful because then it's like, oh, it's nighttime. Let's go to bed.
Right.
But then you'd still have to cast it to find out. Like you'd still need to wait to tell time. And
Sure.
hourglasses are a thing,
Yeah.
obviously. Hourglasses are not a thing that are probably reliable when you've got them in a backpack.
No. You have to
Like
keep it handy.
Yeah.
So you can see it.
You could always use if clocks are a thing in the world that you're in. If they have any sort of watch, you could use that. It'd probably be gear powered. Some more steampunky games would probably have clockwork that works.
Sure.
You could always have other magical means of telling time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's say you've got a party of fighters. First of all, they don't need to rest as much because they don't have spells.
Right.
But let's say they don't get tired because their physical scores are great. So they're like, yeah, you don't get tired out as easily. You've been down there a couple hours.
Okay.
It's like, all right, now we're gonna sleep. How do you tell how long you sleep for? That's something. See, here's the thing. If you want to go with this and try to do that kind of thing, it's like, all right, you've lost all sense of time. You just slept for 16 hours.
Right. Right.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
You don't know how long it's been.
Exactly.
I know Vsauce on his minefield. He did that one where he was in a white room by himself, alone, with no way to tell time, no way to contact the outside world from there, and no other stimuli for like 3 days.
Okay.
And he talked about it afterwards. Like, there's nothing to do to occupy your mind in there. It's like he was doing physical exercises to try and pass the time, but there was no way to tell time, and you become incredibly disoriented.
Right.
Your sleep cycle is off. The amount of time you're sleeping is wacky.
Yeah.
Like, you're either sleeping very short amounts of time or sleeping lots of amount of times because you have no idea how much time has passed. So you would quickly become incredibly disoriented underground in a dungeon for days.
Yeah. I can totally understand that. Yeah. I'm trying to think about how you would be able to deal with that. I mean, I guess try to get out of it and go to a cave. Or go to an inn. And in the cave, they could put inns in the cave.
That'd be great. It's just a shopping mall. It's a dungeon, but it's a shopping mall. It's the Quebec Underground.
Yeah. We could that feels like, sometimes when you're playing like roguelikes or the dungeon crawlers or something like that, and there are just those occasional levels where there's just a shopkeep there. And or a tavern or something when you go down into it. I think when I played like Undermine, there's places in the different levels where it's like, here's the shop, and you can enjoy the shop in the middle of it.
We should delve into a little deeper into that sometime if we feel like it. Be like, what's like the lore, like reasoning behind a shop being 20 levels down in a dungeon?
Yeah, shops.
Who are they servicing? How do they get there? Where do they get their goods?
Yeah, exactly. How are you able to do that? And more importantly, who thought it was a good idea to set up shop in the dungeon? How many people do you think you're going to have for customers?
Well, apparently a lot.
Yeah. Is this really prime real estate? Yeah.
I assume that the way you get your items then is you strip it off the corpses of the people who have died.
Oh, product is not an issue. You can get plenty of product that way. It's just trying to think about, like, how many people do you think are going to be passing by your storefront if you're like, if it's Spelunky, and the dude just happens to have a little thing in the middle of Spelunky.
We need to actually just design our own dungeon now, but like your party is playing the shopkeepers in the middle, and you have to advertise to get other heroes to come in and then strip their.
Oh, that's excellent.
This will be a it won't be an RPG.
Yeah.
It'll be a card game or something. It'll be a board game,
Oh, very nice. Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Oh, you know what you do? It could be a tile laying game. That would be
Yeah,
good
there
for
you go.
that. Yeah, and you have to keep expanding out the the cave system, and then you have to determine where you want to put your resources for like advertising and stuff.
Yeah, it'll be a reverse vast.
Yeah, it will be. You know,
Yeah.
it would be like Carcassonne, but
Oh,
instead of
okay.
putting your little meeples on it, it will be like you're getting ad space, and you have to get the most ad space for the different tunnel systems and things. Yeah, that would work out okay. But anyway, okay, so like when we started talking about like the idea of time in a dungeon, I guess the thing is I didn't think about it in the terms that you were normally thinking about it, which is like what are the characters going to be able to do? And I think one of the things that's interesting there is that time can also get a little conflated for the players just based on how much time you spend doing the combat and how much time you spend out of combat.
Yeah.
We've talked about it when we did Delve, but the idea of like one combat that might only be about 30 minutes in game can take you hours to go through, sometimes entire sessions, and then you can spend like maybe an hour describing what a 5-day trip from one place to another is in the overworld, and that's
Yeah,
true of the dungeons too.
Yeah, and the thing there is a half hour of actual combat time, like in-game combat time, would be epically long. I think I was talking to Crave the other day about how sword fights, typically like in movies and stuff, are really epic, and they take like a lot of parries and thrusts, and like they're these big graceful battles of these two people with excellent sword skill. But in reality, a sword fight to the death would be determined in a matter of blows.
Sure.
Like a samurai fighting another samurai is usually determined in a single stroke of the blade.
Yeah.
You know, it's not this epic swords clashing on each other's swords, hitting each other's armor, parries and thrusts, and no, it's brutal, incredibly violent, and it's like one person's bludgeoned to death.
Right. Right.
So, keeping that in mind, in D&D, combat takes forever. But
Sure.
the rounds are 6 seconds because combat is supposed to be fast. It's fast, it's visceral, it's not this elegant thing that everyone kind of makes it out to be. The only way that is a thing is if you're doing like fencing,
Mm-hmm.
which is not a combat to death. It is a gentleman's sport of back and forth. But even the rounds in fencing are fairly quick.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the differential between those as well, I will say that is something that video games did solve. Because when you're playing, like, let's say a Skyrim, for instance, the amount of time that you are in combat is still in relation to the game world. Everything's done in real time.
Yeah.
When you are moving along, you're also moving along at the same pace. And they also kind of solve one of the problems about figuring out how you do rests, because a lot of times they don't.
Yeah.
They just have potions or health items or something, or they have a magic system so that you have a pool, like a mana system.
Yeah.
And if they do rests, it's usually like, do you want to sleep in this bed for however many hours and just call it good? That, though, realistically, like you were saying, how do you know how long you slept for? Like,
Well, I think one of those things is usually in video games with the rest system is that you don't need to sleep, but in a lot of them, unless they're survival games, but they're like, yeah, you can get a bonus for sleeping though. You can get like a XP increase for whatever or whatnot.
right.
I think an interesting take on that would be is you don't need to sleep, but say your stamina starts regenerating slower if you don't sleep,
Yeah,
up to a point where it's just like your stamina just doesn't regenerate. Like
right.
at all. So it's like you have to sleep or else you are ineffective now because you're fucking tired.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm mostly thinking like, you can, the idea of taking a slider and saying I want to sleep for this many hours.
Oh yeah.
It's like, yeah, well, if you're all alone in most of these games, then I don't think that's going to necessarily work. You're probably going to have a little bit of an issue.
Yeah. What happens when you sleep in Fallout 4 for 17 years?
Yeah, nothing. Nothing really happens in the outside world. Not really, because it's kind of static, that particular game. When you get into those dungeons, in terms of both the player experience and for your PCs, how long do you think is a good length of time for your characters to be down there and for the players to actually be playing it while they're in there?
See, here's the thing, like, in game time, I would expect a dungeon to maybe take a player's, like, a day.
Sure.
Like, that's a decently sized dungeon. I'm assuming there's scouring everything.
Sure.
Like, you can go to abandoned places in the real world and explore the whole thing in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
And that's assuming you're looking through everything and you've got cameras and you're recording shit, because that's what you do when you explore abandoned places, I assume.
Fair.
You know, I would say a decently sized place you could explore the entire thing in a literal day, unless you're a mega dungeon.
Sure.
And that's the thing, is I feel like most dungeon crawls take multiple sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So they take multiple real world days to get through.
Sure.
But in game time, they're either taking exponentially longer than they need to, based on the actuality. Like, if you base it on reality,
Sure.
like, you're gonna be resting multiple times to do that. I feel like multiple sessions, you're gonna be resting multiple times. You can be like, yeah, this is just gonna take a single day in game, but we're gonna play it over 15 sessions. That would be, I don't even know. That would be a lot. It's like, yeah, this is still the same session you were in. It's like, what?
Yeah.
What? We're still playing the same one that we started on 15 sessions ago? People would be like, what are you talking about, man?
Yeah. And I think that that's where we get into some issues, because I'm going to start to get very bored of the setting and what we are doing in the game if I am still there 5 months later.
You're in the same room.
You're in the same room.
You're in the same room.
Yeah, exactly.
We haven't left this room yet? No.
Yeah. And similarly, like you were talking about with people saying you gotta bring rations and food and stuff, it's like, how long are you preparing to be down there? How many supplies do you need to bring with you?
Are we on an overland trek here, or are we in, like, one building?
Yeah, am I spelunking? Is that what we're doing right now? How... And, oh my goodness. Can you imagine if you had, like, a really evil GM? And what they did is they were like, yeah, okay, so here's something that you can give to your players next time. They go into the cave. They slide down into the cave. There's no way to get back out from the exit, from the entrance. So they got to find another way. So now there's no going back to taverns at the end of the day and calling it a day coming back later. They got to stay in there now. There's no way back up.
Welcome to your new home.
Welcome to your new home. It is the crypt. Enjoy. You're going to be here forever. Sorry.
And ever.
And ever. I mean, in terms of... I think what's really strange here is that for the amount of mechanics that you see in tabletop role-playing games, especially, there really isn't much to track time as a whole. Like, they figured out how to do it for rounds of combat, but you don't really see much in terms of the overarching passage of time and what to do with that. Like, for the most part, and this was always something that I wanted to see fleshed out more, is if my crew is down in that dungeon or the cave system, wherever, for a month, and they come back out, I would expect that the world has changed a bit from when they originally went down there. And maybe some people are a little upset that they've taken so long because the problem that they were trying to solve has exacerbated in the meantime.
Right.
Up above. And like, oh, you were trying to find the magical artifact down there so that we could depose the evil sorcerer from their throne. Well, it's been like 4 months now since you went down there to get that stone to take away the sorcerer's power, and the sorcerer has effectively turned half the population into kobolds. What are you gonna do about that? Why'd you take so long? Did we get lost along the way? Like, what happened? So I started thinking about that the passage of time, no matter where you are, whether you're in the caves, whether you're in the overland sections, should have some, correlation to the world around you. It shouldn't stay static like that. And
well, that's the thing, though. Generally, in an RPG setting, like in tabletop, or video games too, the passage of time doesn't typically actually dictate the passage of events happening, unless they're on a time limit.
Yeah.
Which doesn't happen nearly as often, I don't feel.
No.
Games like Majora's Mask, though, for instance, I believe was... No, it was the Ocarina.
No, it was not.
Majora's Mask was the moon, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't play Zelda games. I just know about it from hearing about it so
That's
much.
okay. I never actually played Majora's Mask, but I know about it.
The moon has like a 3-day cycle, and you have to do things, and it's timed.
Sure.
So that's a time limit. But in an RPG and a lot of other games, they don't typically count the passage of time based in actual time. It's the when you catalyze things, when you are the catalyst of the thing happening. So for instance, in Lord of the Rings, Sauron was just doing his thing up until you catalyze that event.
Right.
Where it's like, oh yeah, now I've got the One Ring of Power, and it's like, guess I'll get off my fucking ass.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was a status quo. The world just stayed a similar way, and then you came in, you were the Deus Ex Machina, you changed everything. And,
like, as you were saying,
yeah,
the sorcerer turned all these kobolds into statues or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, you had 40 years to fucking do this, guy.
Yeah.
What have you been doing for 40 years, sitting on your ass over there?
Yeah.
It took, what, a single hobbit with a sword to get you off your fancy now? What are you doing?
Yeah,
it's like you are the laziest bad guy ever.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I see. So finally, we're like, all right, well, I guess we finally got to get in gear. Yeah, I always thought that was kind of a weird, like, thing in fantasy in general, but I do see it so much in gaming that I wanted to see it fleshed out more. There was a game that I played, that was Outer Wilds, not Outer Worlds, but Outer Wilds, and that actually is also one where you're on like a 22-minute cycle, and you go through the world, and it's clockwork. It's a clockwork world, which we might talk about in more detail on some
I've
I've
heard a lot about that game as well.
Yeah, and Minute, which is also like a smaller one. It's like literally 1-minute rounds to get to places, but those are all time loop scenarios, where you start back at your beginning. It doesn't just keep going forward and events happen in time. There was a game from Spiderweb Software, Avernum, I want to say 3. Well, there was Exile 3, then Avernum 3, which was the remake they did. And that actually does have stuff where if you do not address certain situations in a timely fashion, you will see the consequences of you not doing something. And that's really turn-based more than anything, but there were towns that were being, like, attacked by slimes or other monsters, and if you do not solve the problem that they're having with that, slimes will start to wreck the town. They will eventually abandon some of their shops, because the slimes have completely taken over, to the point where basically the town isn't there at all. The shopkeepers are gone, the people are gone, and there's no coming back from that either. You've now completely abandoned them, you didn't do it in the time frame, and they do actually have, it takes you this long to go from this point to this point, and so think about your time constraints there, because it's going to matter. So they did do that. I would say that maybe like in a Stardew Valley too, you have different seasons, and so you have to know what you're going to be doing because it is a time management thing. But that's one of those where there's never really any long-term consequences to it.
Yeah.
You can kind of keep coming back to it. So
Yeah.
but in TTRPGs, I would have really liked to see a little bit more of that. Like, let's be realistic, folks. You know, yeah, you might be down there for a long time. You're in that mega dungeon for a year. But, you know, that doesn't mean that life doesn't keep going on up top.
You gotta remember, people don't want realism in their fantasy. Sometimes.
I think people want a measure of realism.
I
that
tend
keeps you
to try to
engaged.
make my worlds feel more dynamic when I have made them and when I run games. And so, yes, it's been a few years, but that's why the world isn't static from my games typically.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are there are typically location based rather than event based for the players doing a certain thing. If there's something in this area, it will be there until acted upon or until their stuff is going there. So when you accidentally summon fire elementals that are way above your character's party, power level to deal with, because it is something that would have been there no matter what level you were, it's like, well, the passage of time, these have been there, they're still kind of active, and you did something dumb.
Yeah.
That was pre-scripted.
Sure.
So it makes the world feel more like it's got a life of its own as well.
Certainly. I also start worrying if you're down in the cave system long enough, a new generation of monsters will be born, grow up, and then be able to attack you while you're in the dungeon.
Yeah.
In the meantime.
What's the gestation period of those goblins again?
Yeah. And when you're dealing with something like those insects, like the ant kegs, how long does it take from pupation to, adulthood where they can become, warriors and workers? That's something to be considerate of. I would be very wary of that if you have the certain kind of person running your game that thinks about this stuff. It might matter. It might matter. Passage of time in video games, that's one of those things where that's usually just built in because you can see day and night cycles a lot of the time. But in terms of when you get into TTRPGs, it's so much more abstract, it feels like, and should be more dynamic. I would like to see it more dynamic than that. Or possibly built into the system itself. That's the thing, though. I had one final question for you. Do you see a way that you could actually build a time system into an RPG?
I think that's a better question, not from me. I think that's a better question for anyone listening.
Yes, that is a good question.
For Discord and for Twitter and for anyone who's listening on whatever platform, for voice clips, if you want to send those in with your thoughts.
Absolutely. So I guess what we'll do to just kind of end this is we're going to send the Crit Think off to all of you. How would you build a time system into an RPG? Let us know.
I think that's the best way to end the Crit Think section, is a question for people to answer on their own.
That's right.
Hopefully interactively with us, though. I think that's a good way to do that section.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you can keep it
Great
to
idea.
yourself. We'd like to know, though.
Yeah,
If you
share.
could.
Sharing is caring. Show us that you care.
Exactly. And then we can all have a crit thing together. All right. So one more thing, Alex. One more.
What are we at for time? How much did that one take up, by the way?
That took up quite a bit, actually. Those,
good.
Those first
I
two
thought it
segments
did.
were long, yeah. Which is
good.
probably why it's good we're going to have a short one at the end.
Yes.
All right, one more thing. I've been thinking about some basic mechanics, kind of going back to the roots of what we used to do on that other show that we don't talk about very often.
You mean Delve?
That one, yeah, the Delve. we used to talk about some basic mechanics and stuff like that, and I thought that it would be nice to just kind of explain about one simple term on this segment, where we just explain what it is for people that are not familiar, and also why it's a really interesting idea that I personally wouldn't have come up with. And so, on this particular subject, segment, whatever I'm calling this, for this one, we're going to be talking a little bit about the term tapping. To tap a card. And it usually...
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about, like, tapping a tree.
That's why I thought I would be more specific.
Or tapping that... no, we can't talk about that one. We're expletive, but not that expletive.
Tapping that like button?
Tapping that like button.
Tap that like button. Tappa, tappa, tappa. Tap it as many times as you want. It's the one right next to the bad button. But...
That's going to be the one that we're clipping out of context.
Welcome. Teaser! Anyway, so on this one I want, talking about the tapping mechanics, and it usually comes from collectible card games. Specifically, the actual term tap is used in Magic the Gathering, but there are similar mechanics in other games as well.
Yeah, they're just not called tapping.
Yeah.
Because Magic trademarked that, I believe.
It can only be used in the Magic, that term.
In the Magic.
In the magics of the gatherings. The magics of the gatherings. But basically, for those of you who are not aware or not familiar with collectible card games, when you have monsters or different artifacts and lands out and you expend them, what you do is you are supposed to tap, which means that you take your card from the vertical position, portrait, and you turn it to a landscape, the horizontal. And
I always did like a 45-degree turn. I didn't really turn it sideways.
To be honest with you, I did too, but I think that they say you're supposed to turn, like, in all the examples that they show, like the diagrams, they always show it completely turned over.
All right.
But I think most people just didn't want to spend as much time, or the cards are too close, so they just like turn them over a little bit so they're not upright. But that is supposed to represent that indeed you have utilized the card, and it is no longer usable until your next round. Pretty simple mechanic, pretty straightforward. You don't need anything else involved. But the reason why I find it so fascinating is because it is such an easy visual reference for everybody at the table to tell what is currently in play and what is not in play. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I played Magic. I know what you mean.
You can see how that could have been much more complicated, though, right?
Sure, they could have been like, throw the cards out the window.
You could throw the cards out the window.
All right, it's no longer in front of you. It's been expended. Like, it could have been like, tear up the... Could have been the Blacker Lotus. Like, when you use this card, tear it up.
Yeah, you can't use it no more. Sorry.
Talk about a collectible card game. Every card is a one-use only card. People just proxy the shit out of them then, but you know.
Oh my god. Did you ever see that meme that they made? I saw it going around. The Black Lotus. And somebody like had cut out the Black Lotus to make a coaster.
Yeah. No, I was thinking Chaos Confetti.
Oh, okay.
From the Unglued Unhinged sets, where it's tear up this card and toss it in the air, and whatever it lands on is destroyed.
Nice. I kept thinking about the development of that, though, and how interesting it was that, you know, if you do have a rectangular card, being able to just turn it over to the side to make it clear to you and your opponent that that is not going to be utilized. There are cards where they don't actually tap. They stay in play. But again, if I'm playing against you, for instance, which I won't do because I don't want to.
Because I kick your ass.
You see, fun side story time. I have a Phage the Untouchable that I use in my black deck. It's my pure black deck. It siphons life. That's what I like to do. I like to take people's life totals and add it to mine. I have Phage the Untouchable. In case you're not familiar with that card, it's basically a legendary creature. If it if it deals any damage to a creature, that creature is destroyed and removed from the game. If it does any direct damage to a player, that player instantly loses the game. However, I should have been paying attention to what lands he had and had not tapped, because he still had a few islands, I believe, that were available and were still in play.
Oh no, I was playing my black-red deck.
Oh, okay. So what did you use on me?
I believe it was a backlash.
That sounds right. That's the one that damage that I would have done goes back and deals damage to...
Tap untapped. Tap target untapped creature and have it deal damage equal to its power to its controller.
Right. So what happened there was that he said, Phage is now going to deal that damage to you instead, and my own Phage killed me. So there's that.
Yeah.
Be very careful when you use Phage the Untouchable, because there are cards in Magic that will reflect damage and do other things like that, and you can kill yourself off real easy.
See, you explained your black deck was a Siphon Life deck, but my black-red deck is a kill creature gain life deck.
Yeah.
So it functions as a Siphon Life kill creature, and then also has creatures reverting damage to their owner, because it's a very creatureless deck.
Right.
It's got like maybe four creatures in it.
Sure.
So the way I get around that to kill my opponent is to have their creatures kill them, and to then Siphon Life from them as well. Yeah.
That
deck is fun.
Sure. One of the things that I made a deck around too that actually used the tapping mechanic quite heavily was it was essentially a ping deck, and so I had like the I want to say it was like stinging barriers, stuff like that, the goblin slingers, and so basically just a lot of different monsters, walls and stuff, and you tap those, you turn them over to the side, and they deal 1 damage direct to something. So you get enough of those out, you can essentially just destroy different creatures as they launch, even though you don't have a lot of defensive ability, or defensive abilities, yeah. You can
the way
still...
to break and utilize that is with the Kiki Jiki Intruder Alarm combo.
Oh, okay.
From Kamigawa.
Oh.
Intruder Alarm is whenever creatures don't untap during their untapped steps. Whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures you control.
Right.
Kiki Jiki is a legendary creature that you can tap it to make a copy of a creature, put it into play with haste that disappears at the end of turn.
Okay.
So, utilizing those two together, you have an infinite combo creation kit for whatever the hell you want. So you go, oh, goblin slingers, they're pingers. All right, I make an army of infinite amount of pingers. They all tap. They deal infinite amount of damage to every target on the field.
Yeah.
I would use that with the Emberfist Zubera, which was, all right, whenever Emberfist Zubera goes into a graveyard of play, it deals damage equal to every other Zubera put into a graveyard that turn.
Right.
So I have an infinite amount of creatures that each deal an infinite amount of damage to a target.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now if you want another really simple way to actually deal with that, if you don't have a lot of card combos, if you do end up with something like, I want to say it's like a Tremor or an Earthquake card that will just deal like 1 or 3 damage to every creature on the field, you can eliminate a lot of those small pinging creatures pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So there's also that.
The other really fun one with the Kiki Jiki combo was Gemini Engine.
Oh.
Because when Gemini Engine attacks, it creates a copy of itself. So you just make an infinite number of Gemini Engines that then attack and create an infinite number of copies of themselves that are also attacking. Because if you're doing infinite combos, you just want to absolutely fuck somebody.
Yeah, exactly. The reason why back on subject. The reason why
This will be the extended version. You can cut out as much of that as you want. Leave that for the extended Patreon version.
yeah, somebody will like it. But
I think someone will get a kick out of it.
oh yeah. But what I find interesting though is just the idea that it's just such an easy visual reference, and it can be very complicated when you get into late game in a lot of CCGs where you just have like a lot of stuff out on the field, and it can be very complicated for you to easily and quickly reference what is happening on the playing field, depending on how many players you have and how heavy they are into artifacts and everything like that, and lands, so that also I can tell what kind of capabilities my opponent has even when I'm on, when it's, my turn. Because I want to know, like, what lands do they have untapped, because I want to know if they're trying to use a counter, some kind of instant,
Some kind of murder instant.
waiting for me to do something, or waiting to use one of the activated powers on the cards.
Yeah.
And I find that it's a very easy mechanic to utilize. I think that's why it's used in CCGs so often. But it does convey a lot of information very, very quickly without having to do a lot of, stat recording and everything like that about what's going on the field.
Right.
Yeah.
A different way you could do that with it, just as simple mechanic-wise and visual representation, would also be like tokens. For instance,
Sure.
if a creature has been expended, you can put a token on it. For instance, if it's tapped out, in this case, you'd be like, all right, well, now put a token on that because it's been used, it can't be used again. The issue you have with that is then it becomes a lot messier. It's still a good visual representation,
Sure.
but it's a lot more physical stuff you have to move around. So
Yeah.
it becomes infinitely more busy than just tapping a card sideways.
Right. I think it's the convenience and the less moving parts involved, which I really
Right.
appreciate. From a design perspective, that's really useful, because especially with something that you're taking on the go and that you might just have your deck with you, and you don't want to have to carry too much stuff, because that's one of the advantages of collectible card games is that,
Also very true.
yeah, you can take it with you and go places with it. That I have the deck of cards, I don't want to carry a whole lot of other stuff with me. Because, I mean, I do have a bag of the individual tokens and stuff, but I don't really need to have that most of the
You
time.
don't really want to use them.
No, you don't want to carry around a giant bead bag with you when you're going around. So,
I'm wondering if anyone's ever taken and instead of the tap mechanic, they did a slide mechanic. So like, instead of taking your card and turning it this way, they're just like, yeah, move your card up or half an inch.
oh yeah, I've seen that too.
Oh, is that a thing? I don't know.
I've
I
seen
have
some.
not.
I've seen some people do something similar to that. I think the one problem is that then you have to have like all of your cards in a uniform size. So it
That's
gets.
what playmats are for, Nathan.
But then I have to have a playmat with me. See, now I gotta carry
And peripheries now.
now more even peripheries. It's like when
Stay tuned for the TPK playmat.
oh, perfect. Nobody wants that. What we'll do for the playmat though is we'll have the actual D20 logo, and you have to put the cards in the little spots on the logo. Perfect.
That's how you summon demons.
That's how you summon demons. You put 6 of them on the little things, and you've created a sectagram. Sectagram. Hey, and that means that's all the number of creatures that you can actually put into play. We have a maximum creature count for you.
That's a different game idea entirely.
Yeah, that's a different game entirely. Yeah, no, I prefer not to have any more peripheries than I really need to have. It was why, like, when people talk to me about D&D, I was like, oh, so how do you play that? And they were like, oh, well, you have the books. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, you have the books. Yeah, well, then you also have the character sheets, and there's also the GM screen, the DM screen that you put across, and you're probably going to need to make some notes and get a notepad and stuff, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, yeah, how much? You need a dice bag. Get a dice bag. It's like, oh, no. This is not nearly as few things as I thought.
I see the reason why that you never got into like Warhammer.
Oh yeah, no, I can't
many- how
carry
many-
that much stuff.
What do I need? Well, you need an army. All right, an army. All right. So that's what, a couple guys. It's like, oh, it's like 40 or 50 models. Oh, okay. And then you need a book. Okay, a book. All right, but then you need another book for your army. Not the same book. Not the same book. Different book. You got your rule book, your army book. Okay. Your opponent needs a book for their army and 40 to 50 models or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
And then
then
you need about 100 dice. What?
and then
And then you need paints, super glue, and hours of free time.
but then and then you need a battlefield.
And then you need a tape measure and props and a battlefield and a table that's at least a good 6x4.
Yep. So probably not something that you're taking to the park or a bistro.
Why are you playing games at a bistro?
Because if I didn't, then I'd have to remind myself that I'm in a bistro.
Yeah, but the food would be... anyways.
You put the cards on the food. You put the cards on the food, and that's how you do a card game. There should be a card game that's just about food.
There probably is.
There-
But,
Yes.
just in my head now, we need to make a game
Mm-hmm.
that can be played with business cards.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
And then you have to pick out certain words or something that actually
No,
Have
we'll
value.
figure it out later.
okay. Business business CCG.
Yes.
Collectible business card game.
Yep.
A CBCG. A BCG.
Sure.
BCG. Business card game.
There you go. Perfect.
We're totally calling it that.
Yep.
No idea how it works. Don't care. Just and we probably won't put much thought into it, but it will be on a Kickstarter near you probably pretty soon. We'll work it out. Anyway. Okay. So this has been an episode of Total Pebble Knockdown.
This has been an episode of Total Pebble Knockdown.
Yes, one of them. There's several now. And I hope that you've enjoyed this one. If people were looking for more resources or some of the other stuff that we have for Total Pebble Knockdown, Alex, where could they go?
If you are looking for more of what we've been doing, please go to totalpebbleknockdown.com. We have put a bunch of effort into the website, into the things we're doing, the formatting. Honestly, we've been working on this since about February.
Yeah.
So it's been a year
It's,
between everything we've been doing. So we'd love if you checked it all out. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you think there's any improvements we could make to some of the stuff. Honestly, we would just be happy if you checked it out, and if you knew anyone that you thought would be interested in the stuff we're doing and plan on doing, we would love if you could share it with them.
yes, that would be lovely. That's actually one of the best ways that creators can grow is when people actually that like the content, they share it with others. Feel free, if you are listening to us on Anchor as well, you can send along voice clips if you have comments on recent subjects that we've talked about on the show, or if you have suggestions for topics that you'd like to see us discuss on the show. You can also find us on Patreon. While you're on the website, you can actually link to that. There are some extended episodes over there and some full video pieces for the episodes that you can get early if you are
Those
on
of you that
Patreon.
want to see us.
If you want to see us. Although for the people who are not patrons, we also do have a YouTube channel now where the individual segments are broken out into video pieces, because some of you might want to listen or while you're watching.
Yeah, some of you might want to watch. Got some cool thumbnails up there thanks to our lovely brand director.
Yes,
That's what we're going with the title, brand
new
director.
titles, brand
Brand
director, brand director.
We've also got The shorter segments are great if your like attention span doesn't want to sit there for an hour of listening to a podcast. Either one is fine. We decided we want to break up the episode into the segments and the long form, so people have options on which they prefer.
Exactly, and some of our early responses back seem to say that people seem to like that format. We've been getting some early positive feedback from it, so that's good. That's good.
Good design choices.
Good design choices, hopefully. Or certainly hope.
We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see mostly because anybody who doesn't like it will likely be very vocal and tell us.
That it's terrible.
Yeah, if you think it's terrible, tell us. In a constructive way. If you could tell us in a constructive way, that'd be great.
Because if you don't, I'll tell you what website to go to.
That's right. And you might find that you get rickrolled. Do we have that YouTube? I think I have that YouTube one. Well, we're no strangers to love. You know the rules, and so do I.
No.
Anyway, you can also find us on Twitter. I am at Citanium.
I'm at EXP Limited. Our brand director is at Craveyard. And the show is at Pebble Knockdown, somewhere on screen, I think.
Should be somewhere below in this kind of cornerish place.
Unless you're listening to the podcast, then sorry.
Yeah, but that's okay. You can also find links on the website, so you can find it there, and you should know how to get there. I'm certainly hoping. Coming up too, expect that in the next month or two, we're probably going to have some guests on the show. Those are probably going to be little separate vignettes all themselves, but we're very excited to talk to you more about that when we can actually get those lined up. So look forward to that. We had a tradition back on Delve where we actually talked to a whole lot of game designers. We're not shying away from doing some of that on this show either. So looking forward to it.
And not just game designers.
No.
We're opening up the gamut to all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. There might be more realms of discovery. Realms of discovery, I tell you, in the future. Until next time, we're probably going to get another episode. I think that have they renewed us for another episode?
I mean, we haven't been picked up at all, so...
Oh, so I guess we don't have to worry about the renewal.
Exactly.
We're completely free. That's great.
12 more years.
12 more years of Total Pebble Knockdown. There's so many pebbles, folks. Until the next episode, which we apparently are picked up for, because we pick up ourselves. That's an interesting anyway.
Until I cut that somewhere, so it's fine.
It's fine. Until next time, until the next episode, thank you for joining us on Total Pebble Knockdown, and roll for a catchphrase. Still have not figured out how we're ending these.
We don't need to end it, it's just bye, click.
Okay, yeah, Total Pebble Knockdown, bye, click. Perfect! See you later, everyone.
Bye.